Hey, Michael.
Hi, Luke. How are you?
I am doing great today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. I am just getting some work done. Hold on one second. Let me grab this
Yeah.
over. It's super crazy bright in here.
Yeah.
Oh,
My wife and I actually just moved out of a basement.
oh no kidding.
So I've just been like dying for any light I can get. As you can see,
Here's
it's actually,
sunshine. Sunshine.
yeah, it's pretty nice, pretty good lighting where I'm at right now. But yeah, spent the last 8 months in like a basement, very little light. And you know what's crazy is, I'd like to think we humans are more sophisticated than this, but just a huge impact on everyday mood and just, feeling a little bit down. But it's been
Yeah,
great.
yeah, that vitamin D. I guess that sunshine is kind of important to humans and plants and the earth, I guess.
Yeah. So for posterity's sake, for anyone who would view this later, maybe just give a little intro about, who is Michael Koep?
Who am I?
Who is Michael Koep? Yeah.
I was born and raised in Coeur Idaho, and I'm a writer and a musician and a relatively decent cook. Um, and I like to travel. I'm a sword fighter from time to time. I haven't been fencing very often.
Mhm.
It's been had been a bit of a break with that lately, which I need to get back into it. Um, yeah, I mean that's those are sort of the crib notes.
There's the crib notes. Well, what have you been up to recently nowadays? Like what's been kind of the forte out of all those things, what have you been working on?
Well, the thing that I've been working on lately is my third book came out for the New Earth trilogy in October of
Hmm.
2018, and since then our production team and our publishing company had been working toward seeing it become either a feature film or a streaming series, and the idea has been there for since the mid 90s when I began writing the
Hmm.
books. Um, excuse me, but just recently, well, actually, over the last 2 years, we'd written several scripts. I had written a few different scripts, and we're right now turning the corner into development. So we've been in development for the
Wow.
last year, and we have just pulled in a showrunner, which is a really talented guy named George Straighton, and
Okay.
he's just a remarkable writer and Imagineer and
Hmm.
incredibly smart and uh, has really turned this thing into, I think, a passion project for himself. And between the two of us, we're trying to, sort of put the pieces on the board and see
Hmm.
how this whole thing's going to fall out.
Yeah, and I imagine so you've written these stories, and I'm sure it's just been a ton of work doing it. I've seen they've gotten some acclaim, and you got a big readership. What's it like? Just a complete change of medium for this idea you've had, and now you're changing the medium on it, and now you're going, you're aiming at going toward video. How does it feel as the creator of it doing that?
That's a great question, and it's I think a lot of authors face that
Hmm.
notion of watching their work being changed before their eyes, and that's kind of why I bring up George and his love for the project. He's got such a wonderful eye, and he can I I think he really gets a sense. Well, I know he gets a really he has a very good feel for the story.
Hmm.
Um, I kind of look at it this way. I've always, as a musician, when you're working in a band, you write a song and you bring that song in to the rest of your bandmates and you play it and then your bandmates get a hold of it and then they start to change it a little bit.
Hmm.
And then maybe you make a recording and you say, oh, well, that's going to be the recording of the song. And then sometime later you may go in,
Live, yeah.
oh,
looks
cool.
like uh looks like it just dropped out for a
Yeah,
second.
your picture froze too. That was weird. Both,
Okay.
yeah, yeah. Oh, well.
Yeah,
Um,
so you're talking about you got your bandmates that, hear your song and now they might
yeah,
make a
you
few
get a
little.
chance to record your song, and you may record it in your home studio, or you just might bring a version of it that really love.
Yeah.
When you work with a producer or you work in a different recording studio, oftentimes that particular version will shift, and
Hmm.
usually it'll shift into something that's a little bit more accessible for a wider audience. Or, a good producer will come in and hear it and go, if you just change these couple of things, it'll hit the heart in from a different direction. And
Yeah.
the good news is you have your original cassette that you recorded when you were in your bedroom, and you've
Yeah.
got that. And in some senses, that's kind of how I feel about the mythology, the
Mm.
books, is that that's the way I wanted to write. Those were the books I wanted to write,
Yeah.
and I managed to tell the story in that medium the way that I felt was the most effective. George is coming in, and he is going to take what I've done and try to recreate, I think, the feelings, only do it with his expertise of knowing how to put a script together and really entice an audience. And
Hmm.
it's just a different set of paintbrushes, really, that he's so good at.
Mm.
So
I like
incredible.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Different set of paintbrushes.
Yeah.
I saw some interview or some clip from an interview online. I just looked up before this a couple days ago, and you had said something about. I think you were talking about the idea of this book, and you were traveling around a bunch of different places,
Yeah.
and so what got me thinking is, so this mythology you've created, was this like a you wake up one morning and you're like, oh, I've got a great idea? Or was it like, fifth grade Michael Koep is staring outside the window in school and is like, you know, by some point in my life, I want to have this great story. Like, on what side of the spectrum of spontaneity was this kind of from?
Wow, that's interesting, because I think you're hitting on all the points there. Um, when everything shifted, I think for the majority of your fantasy and sci-fi people these
Hmm.
days, that are at least in my or yours and my age group, everything shifted in 1977 when you go to a movie theater and see a very little known film called Star Wars. It changed everything for me in that time. And after I saw that, I realized I wanted to start telling stories. And it was soon thereafter that my uncle Stan took me to a double feature in this small theater in Coeur d'Alene called the Wilma Theater.
Mm.
Um, and we saw Ralph Bakshi's animated version of The Lord of the Rings.
Oh man,
Yeah,
what a great movie!
yeah, and Wizards. It was a double feature. Have you ever seen Bakshi's Wizards?
No, no.
Well,
The
if you've
only
not
the
seen
only
that,
Bakshi I've seen is the Lord of the Rings one, and that was that's a lot of Bakshi for me, right
oh
right
man,
there.
I mean, at that time I just was. After that, I was all swords and sorcery. I mean, my
Uh
whole
huh.
world was about trying to figure out what kind of story I could tell. I
Yeah.
became then right after that I ended up reading the books,
Hmm.
discovering that the depth of the story in terms of its mythology, its languages, and
Yeah.
its linguistics, and I became very interested in that.
Hmm.
And I mean, I think as young as probably 11 or 12, I began working on my own language. And I wrote a couple of different languages during that time, and I wasn't really sure how I was going to use them.
Hmm.
Um, this, of course, is in reference to your question, where did it all stem from?
Well, no, I mean it's all very pertinent. I mean, you talked about languages, and
Yeah,
so look at Tolkien himself.
yeah,
Huge philologist, and
yes,
there seems to be something about languages that are just like a lot of these great authors I'll read, I'll look at their background and they're like they're classicists or something. So
yes,
it's interesting that you started with the languages that early, because I feel like more than just being, oh, it's a language that the characters speak in it, you are in some way, it seems like you're actually building the world.
well, yeah, I think building any world obviously comes from language, right? So, when we tell stories, it comes from the language we tell. And of course, I was too young to really understand that. I just, at that time, just was fascinated by the idea that the word, green could be said differently, and
Hmm.
still have the same meaning in someone else's mind. And so I just started creating these different languages. Well, um, when I became 15, 16, 17 years old, of course, I fell in love with rock music and drums, and my fiction and interested in language and fantasy and those kinds of things found their way into lyrics. So there was a good chunk of time that I just completely fell in love with rock music and began rock and roll touring and playing in bands. And when I came back to when I had the idea of Basil Fenn, the painter in my books, and Locke Neuwirth, the psychologist in my books, and I knew that there was a fantasy element, I knew that I needed to kind of adopt a larger world vision. And I reached back to those early languages and resurrected them. And while they were very, I mean, they were made by a kid, I think I've added a really relatively nice, I think I've infused them with a little bit more sophistication at this point. And I used them. So it was kind of cool to kind of reach back to something that was a kid and bring it back to life in something that is larger, I guess.
Yeah, there's some weird element
kind of like finding an old toy, it's kind of like finding an old toy,
But there seems to be some weird element in that a lot of, I don't want to say acquiring success, or a lot of excellency in some ways returning to your childhood in some weird, like Robert Greene has a book called Mastery. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but he's got this idea. He goes through, just what he calls the masters throughout history, Napoleon Bonaparte, Da Vinci, people like that. And one of the huge themes he has is he calls them primal inclinations. And he says that what these masters have done in common is they've taken something from their childhood that just absorbed their whole selves, and then they just took that out for the next 40 years. So really their mastery was just a perfection of whatever it was in their childhood, that little ember that they were born with.
What a beautiful thought. I read somewhere recently, I want to say it was Neil Peart, the drummer from Rush. He had written a book, and somewhere in there he anything that he created, he would put up he would introduce it to his 16-year-old self, and if it cut the mustard for your 16-year-old self, because how your 16-year-old self could be. It's either this is really cool or that sucks, and it seems to have a much better way of making those kinds of decisions. And I love that idea. That's a great idea.
Man, but so you were drawn from stuff you had kind of thought of in childhood. So maybe with like the original question of where on the spectrum, it's kind of like both and, where it's
I think it's definitely both. Yeah, it was that pendulum swinging back and forth, and the idea of wanting to write about art as sort of a main theme, and storytelling being a primary theme for the story, for the books, was a lot of fun for me as well. Paintings. Have you had the opportunity to look at the book?
I've not looked at the book, not yet. I definitely going to after even just a little bit. I've heard of it now. I have seen some of your paintings. That's the thing, is that your name has kind of been I've known of your name for the last few years. I like didn't really know where I originally came across it. It's kind of funny. But I saw some of your paintings on some, I think maybe Coeur d'Alene had a display. Maybe they were doing one of those things.
I've shown some work a couple of times, you bet.
But yeah, with that, I've always kind of thought with, so at the beginning, you had kind of mentioned these different things you do, art, you're writing books, you're doing swordsmanship, and I'm only 23, so I haven't lived long enough to kind of test my ideas with experience. So that's one of the reasons I want to talk to someone like you. But I've kind of got this idea where, if I learn something new, it's a different thing, but you just feel like in some weird way you're like seeing the same thing in this other discipline you had, like a lot of the same lessons. So I was wondering, since you've looked at so many different things, do you ever feel like maybe at some intangible otherworldly level, it's like testing the same part of your soul, at least in maybe the creative element?
Yeah. I mean, I used to talk about, in those late night alcohol-induced conversations, and you talk about magic and things like that, whatever magic is. And the Carl Sagan scientific mind of mine, doesn't necessarily believe in magic as, it's sort of portrayed in as a paranormal, supernatural kind of thing. And yet I believe in it complete with every, atom of my being, in that it does exist, but it exists through the arts. And I think we know that when we hear a song that absolutely just elevates us, or we read a story that transports you somewhere, and for 3 hours you're completely, it's impossible. The experience of reading an incredible piece of poetry that takes you out of your element, that's to me magic. I don't know if that necessarily answers your question,
No,
but
yeah.
I think that when I'm playing drums, or if I'm fencing, or when I'm writing, I think there's a zone, that area where your concentration really narrows, your focus really narrows, and you get right in, and you just lose track of everything else, and you find that wizard spot that we all, whether it's
Yeah.
cooking or driving or whatever, people have it for all kinds of different things.
I'll have to remember that, the wizard spot. I like that
Yeah.
term. But so with that kind of being said, where you obviously some things in life you would feel in the zone with, and then some things you're like I could never be an accountant personally. Nothing against accounting. They're
Neither.
great people. No.
But there's some magic to business, isn't there? I mean, there are
Yeah.
people that really can do that stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
they love it. I'm acquainted with several people like that. In fact, one of my dearest friends, my publisher, is that way.
Mm-hmm.
He adores numbers and loves to watch the inner workings and the way numbers work, and percentages and ratios. And of course, I'm lost on all of that,
Yeah, but when you were like, let's say, maybe late teens, 20s, how did you navigate feeling like you want to do all these different things, and then being faced with that ever-present question of like what are you going to do, Michael? Because obviously you couldn't say, "Oh, just watch, I'm going to be publishing these books." But like
Yeah.
at that time, what was kind of your thought process?
Yeah. I know what you're talking about. There's that inherent fear of failure,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe even what's even a little bit more frightening is that you don't know if you're right on the right path, or you don't know if you're doing it right. And if there's one thing I certainly learned, is there's no one way to do what you want to do. But I do know, manifestation is a very real thing. For example, I knew I wanted to be a professional rock musician, and so I journal a lot. So I
Mm-hmm.
would literally write in my journal, I will be a professional rock musician. And then I would, write steps down on how I would do that.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to play with these, I always wanted to play with musicians that are better than, that were better than me. And I still try to do that. It helps me become a little bit more proficient at my instrument, and I
Mm-hmm.
can become a better singer and a better player. Same with my writing. I love to, sit and talk with, really talented writers, and
Yeah.
and it just pushes you to that thing. But the manifestation of just uh, there were some years that I worked at the University of Idaho for a program called the Educational Talent Search. And I helped potential first generation college students make it to school. So in other words, their parents or their families didn't go to school.
Mm-hmm.
And here's a pretty talented kid that wants to find himself in a university, or herself at a university. So one of the first questions I would ask them when we started our classes together would be, what do you want? And that's a big question. And I don't think people really ask themselves that question. I think there's a number of reasons, one of which maybe they feel that it's useless,
Mm-hmm.
that they're going to be subject to fate, and they're going to ride the river of fate, and fate's going to deal the hand,
Mm-hmm.
or whatever their background may be. But when you start asking yourself, there's nothing wrong with answering it. Better still, there's nothing wrong with writing it down and being specific. it doesn't mean it's always going to happen, but it's certainly a step toward the goal that you're going to set for yourself. And I wanted to finish these books, and I would journal a lot about it. I would write about the characters. I would think about it, consistently. I'd dream about the characters, and then I'd wake up in the morning and I'd write them. And after a certain amount of time, there's just a habit that builds. And I write every day for the most part. There's a few days that I'll miss here and there, but I typically put pen to paper every single day.
Keep the muscle active. And
yeah, and that in and of itself is just a habit for what I had written down a long time ago. Is I want to write, and so one of the things you do is you write.
Which, while sounding quite simple, is like the secret to the universe right there. And you said, some people don't want to ask, what do you want, for various reasons. And, off the top of my head, it's like you could think, well, maybe some people think it's like a too elementary of a question. Like, really? Like, you're going to ask me that? And then, but not realizing actually how important it is. And then the other one, I think, I've even seen it myself sometimes, is like, we don't want to ask it because we actually don't know. We haven't really, we're afraid of the uncertainty of, what do I actually want? Like, who actually am I? And it's kind of easy to just live life just bouncing around reactionally against like whatever is just, wherever the waves take you.
Well, and I can really appreciate what you're saying there too. It's like, what do you want? Well, I'm not really sure. But I guess it really starts with, well, we certainly know that we want to be happy. And when we're living our life, we want to do something we want to do, that makes us happy. I really appreciated your note, when you sent me a note to want to talk, you were very specific. Here's what I would like to do. And it sounds like you're doing exactly what you want. You're setting out to do. And I think with that kind of energy, that's just going to propel your efforts. So I'm really delighted for what you're going to be doing.
Oh, no, I really appreciate that. It was kind of just, my old boss actually was telling me that I need to interview people, because we would have hours and hours long conversations. And I'm like, there are people like Michael Koep, like these, military historians, or other people I want to talk to. Why am I not doing this? And maybe there are obviously different levels of desire, right? Because if a kid's like, his mom tells him he can't have the cookie, he wants the cookie, but he also wants to please his mom. So it's kind of like, but I guess it's knowing, it's kind of mastering the right one. Because if let's say I want to become a writer, but I also want to just binge watch Downton Abbey. It's kind of like, well, what do you really want, right? Because I think in some weird sense, my desire to become a writer is almost superficially found in just the guilty pleasures of putting off. And it's like, maybe at the deepest level, it's the same thing, happiness. It's just, I guess, maybe discipline maybe that would be the differentiator between them. Because it seems like people are always looking for the same thing, whether they make right choices or wrong choices, right? People who get addicted to drugs, I feel like, are looking for the same thing that people who start businesses and are, philanthropists are looking for.
Well, yeah, I mean, everything is, we're all walking that road to the existential dilemma, right? And anything to get in the way to make the world a brighter place. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, for me, I knew that, I wanted to write stories. A lot of it came from, wanting to write stories for my mother, for example. My mom suffered from manic depression and just all kinds of difficult physical challenges for her entire adult life. Depression being one of the most intense things, and anxiety that she had to deal with. And when I was working on the main character for the New Earth mythology, I thought, how wonderful would it be to find a character that could solve mom's problems. And it's one of the reasons that I chose a psychologist to be that guy. You don't really see a superhero psychologist very often. a psychologist put into a really crazy,
Hmm.
paranormal reality, especially somebody who's incredibly pragmatic and would never believe those kinds of things, and yet he's faced with them. It was that idea to try to find somebody that could elevate and get mom to start thinking about stories and something to distract her. And
Hmm.
that's really what the magic of art is, isn't it? It's imitation, the imitation of nature. It's us trying to create things that inspire and elevate other people. I mean, and it's certainly the job of a musician at the end of the day. When we're playing music, our job is to I don't know, for lack of a better way to say it, is to make people happy or to
Yeah,
bring emotion to people,
man.
to
Yeah,
jump up
that's
and down and dance and to tug at their heartstrings at the right time and to kiss their lover, that kind of thing,
yeah. So
Um,
do you feel deep down inside that really maybe one of the unifying elements to what you love is like storytelling then, even just through your music, through your
yeah,
books, through your art.
yeah, just to elevate and to inspire and to suspend disbelief,
Hmm.
and then again, obviously, those kinds of arts are to help us to become, uh, more empathetic.
Hmm.
Um, Empathy is something seeming that we seem to lack these days. It seems that even though we're able to connect over these all the social media
Hmm.
and even on a Zoom, we seem to lack a certain amount of empathy as a race.
Yeah.
As a
And
human race.
if you don't mind my asking, how old are you?
I'm 50. Let's see, am I 53? I think I'm 53. I turned
Okay.
53. Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah.
If you had like one piece of advice, for uh 18 or 20-year-old, someone young 20s about or rather, I guess a better way to put it, if you could tell 20-year-old Michael Koep one thing, what would it be looking back? Because I do that sometimes with myself. Like, if I could just tell Luke, 10 years ago that. Do you have anything that comes to mind?
I was recently asked that question,
Oh,
and
really?
from different context. I mean, something that I just always told myself, because the coulda, shoulda, woulda thing is always
Hmm.
a uh, tricky thing to go
Hmm.
after. But I just I would tell myself to just keep going, um, just keep moving forward, and try to be empathetic and manifest what you want.
Yeah, because I guess that's
Yeah.
important because the kind of the route of there are all sorts of obstacles that could keep someone from, let's say, getting what they want. And I guess keep going is is one of the most profound because actually another one of the thing in that book Mastery is that one thing you just notice is like the sheer discouragement that every Charles Darwin, Da Vinci, I mean,
Oh my goodness.
no one can stop him though. So there's something for all of us to learn. If or Temple Grandin, I'm not sure if you're familiar with her, but she was born with autism. Parents died when she was young, got kicked out of school for her disabilities, and I mean she's one of the most eminent animal scientists in the world now. And or Anthony Trollope worked as a full-time postman for 20 years, and he wrote about 40 novels.
Wow.
And these are like very good novels too. They're they're not people who publish 10 books a year or whatever, and they're
Right, right,
they're
right.
not good. So that keep going actually makes a lot of sense in that context where it's like everyone's got a great excuse, right?
Well, yeah, and I mean, you know, failure. I mean, we've all read the books. We know what the memes look like, right?
Mm-hmm.
Opportunity. A failed opportunity or anything that fails is an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
It just depends upon how you look at it, your
Yeah.
perspective. But damn it, it's true. It really is true. We can either choose love or fear, and leaning into love, it turns those harder moments into something that you can do it better the next time.
Hmm.
And we all make our share of mistakes. I've made my share, and you know, and you have things that fail. You have, you know, I've had a complete book just completely fail, you know, several, in fact. Well, not several, I should say probably 3 books that just completely fell apart after I
Oh
just worked
man.
so hard on them, you know, and records and songs and travels and relationships and things that just fall apart. And, you know, while that sucks, you know, the choice is, you know, you're wanting happiness in the future. So you take that, you learn from it, and you keep going.
Yeah.
And without that, if you just keep going and start, you know, packing stuff with regret on your back, you know,
Yeah. Keep
and then,
going, asterisk.
yeah, yeah, here are the rules below, right?
Oh man.
But
Well, awesome.
yeah, man.
Hey, well, thank you so much for your time. I don't want to take too much of your time, but I really appreciate just connecting with you and just
Yeah, Luke.
hearing a little bit more about your story. It's really fascinating, and I told a few people about just a small little conversation I would have had on you, and they're very excited to just listen in and hear about it. So I really appreciate your time.
Well, no problem, Luke, and you know, reach out anytime, and I appreciate what you're doing. So let's reconnect. Let's reconnect again when we move into further into development here in the
Yeah.
next 2 or 3 months. There'll be a completely different playing field for me, so it'll be a lot of fun to talk about. So,
Great. Well, I'm going to order myself a couple copies, okay?
yeah, you do.
Thanks,
Awesome.
Michael. Have a good one.
Thanks. Take care.
Yep. Bye-bye.